on the Nile is a 1978 adaptation of the novel written by Agatha Christie, and was the first of 6 times that Peter Ustinov played the Belgian super sleuth Hercule Poirot. In it, Poirot is on vacation in Egypt, and becomes embroiled in a murder investigation when a fellow passenger is killed on a cruise ship traveling down the Nile River. 1974 saw the release of Murder on the Orient Express, and after its massive success at the box office, the producers were eager to make a follow-up. But their efforts to coax Albert Finney back for a sequel were unsuccessful. Apparently, the prospect of again wearing the extensive prosthetics and makeup required for him to play Poirot was not very appealing, especially considering they were going to be shooting in the hot Egyptian sun. So, that led them to Peter Ustinov, who I think was an excellent choice. I'm a big fan of the character, I've read many of the novels, so I always find it interesting watching a different actor take on the part. Of course, I believe the definitive portrayal is and always will be David Suchet in his long-running series. But Peter Ustinov is also very good. It's a bit of a different take on the character, but he taps into something that I think all the best versions of Poirot do. Hercule Poirot is many things. He's brilliant, he's pompous, he's arrogant, he's fastidious, and he's also frequently hilarious. That goes back to the original literary version. And in those, much of the humor stems from his constantly acknowledging that he is the greatest detective in the world, and by extension, typically the smartest person in any room. That was something that the David Suchet series was so adept at portraying, but mostly only in the first half of that series run. After around season 6 or 7, that series made a major tonal shift. The comedy that was so often provided by Poirot and his interactions with Colonel Hastings, Inspector Japp, or Miss Lemon was largely dropped, and the series quickly became much more somber, much more morose, and Poirot himself became much more stern and serious. And I always felt that was a mistake, and made the show less fun to watch. Here, though, Poirot is quite a funny character. In fact, the whole movie is quite light, and it has several completely comedic characters. The humor that Poirot provides is actually less based on his own self-importance, but almost entirely in Peter Ustinov's performance. It's so many things. The way he moves, the glances he shoots at people, the expressions on his face, the fact he always just happens to be listening around the corner, or in the next room, or even from behind a counter, as a steady stream of threats are being lobbed around the ship. But none of that takes away from the fact that he is a brilliant detective. It all just plays into the eccentric nature of the character, and I thought it was a great performance. He's so eccentric that he wears a hairnet while sleeping, but not only on the top of his head, he has another, smaller hairnet over his mustache, which, well, okay. My wife pointed out while we were watching, actually, that this version of the character is much more grandfatherly than the other versions we've watched. And I think that's true. Poirot can sometimes be a bit cold, or someone who is easily annoyed. But not this one, which might be just part of the Peter Ustinov persona, but it also works with the Poirot of the books. There are many times when in the novels, Poirot takes a great interest in young people, offering advice to them, referring to himself as Papa Poirot. Here, he's very much trying to console and give advice to the Mia Farrow character. Speaking of which, as in Murder on the Orient Express, the producers again assembled a star-studded cast. David Niven plays an old friend of Poirot's, Colonel Race, and he's perfect in the role. He's the epitome of suave British nobility, and although he was getting quite a bit older here, he still has the same charm as he did in his heyday of the 1930s and 40s. His character very much fits the role that Colonel Hastings always held in the TV series, as Poirot's right-hand man and assistant in the investigation, although Colonel Race is much more capable than Hastings ever was. Peter Ustinov and David Niven actually make a great team, a great on-screen pair. What's nice here is that Poirot never belittles his friend. They are very much working through the mystery together, although it is inferred that Race knows that Poirot will of course be several steps ahead. Bette Davis and Maggie Smith star as a rich older woman and her companion slash servant, respectively, and they are also a great pairing. Their relationship in the film is one of constant bickering and insulting each other, and is very entertaining. It was odd, though, seeing Maggie Smith so young here. Angela Lansbury plays another quite comedic character, as a novelist on board who is traveling with her daughter, played by Olivia Hussey. Olivia Hussey actually has one of the more dramatic roles in the film, and her scenes were all very well done, and was a nice contrast actually to some of the lighter moments going on around her. George Kennedy is his usual brash, blustering self, and I always enjoy him in movies. I think he's a great character actor. Mia Farrow, as I mentioned, is very good as well, playing the jilted fiancée of Simon McCorkindale's character. And Lois Chiles is excellent as a rich heiress who's on board and the target of much hatred from the other passengers. Jack Warden plays a German doctor, and his presence becomes much needed as the bodies start to pile up throughout the course of the movie. And finally, there is I.S. Johar as the Egyptian concierge for the cruise. I thought he was extremely funny and was a definite highlight every time he showed up. Part of the fun of an ensemble cast like this is just watching all of these old pros interact and play scenes together. There are several scenes where everyone's together in one room. And I always love scenes like that because you know there was no cheating, having everyone come in on different days to film scenes separately. When they're all in the same frame, you know that everyone was there together. And the cast is such a mix of different personalities that it's interesting seeing how they're all going to combine. There's also a scene where the passengers all go exploring some Egyptian ruins together. And there's one shot taken from high above them that the camera keeps panning over, picking out where everyone is, and as the shot keeps going, you realize that there too, everyone was there together. Back then, that might have not been such a big deal, but nowadays the amount of CGI, trickery, and scheduling issues means you don't often have ensemble casts together like this, Knives Out notwithstanding. The film largely plays in the traditional three-act structure of old-fashioned whodunits, with the first section of the movie dedicated to establishing which character is going to be the target, and how everyone around them seems to have some deadly motive to get rid of them. The second act following the investigation and interrogations conducted by the illustrious detective, and finally having the survivors assembled in one room as Poirot reveals all. What made this film stand out for me was the constant use of acting out every accusation that Poirot makes. As the interrogations continue, Poirot explains to each suspect how they could have committed the murder, and the film helpfully shows us how that may have played out. So we get to see almost everyone on board commit the murder. I thought it was an excellent choice and freshened up the usual murder mystery formula. The movie is shot quite traditionally while on board, but also the filming on the boat establishes a great sense of geography of where everyone's staterooms are in relation to one another, and the time and distance needed for a suspect to have potentially committed the crime, or crimes, as the film continues. In a good movie like this, I always like to acknowledge when that is achieved. When it's missing, it can really take away from understanding the action. Speaking of action, there are several startling scenes during the movie, one of which takes place during the touring around the ruins I mentioned earlier. The camera is placed right at the precipice of some columns, while someone, we don't know who yet, is preparing to send a massive stone tumbling down upon two characters. Definitely got my fear of heights going. Also, the acting out of the murders and a couple particularly shocking scenes that happen right in front of Poirot are all quite brutal. It's not played very realistically, but there was a bit more blood than I had expected. It stands out from the otherwise lighter tone that the movie often has, but does serve as a reminder that we're watching a story about murder, after all. The music was by Nino Rota, who is probably most famous as the composer for the first two Godfather films. And there's a recurring theme that I thought was very reminiscent of the opening theme for the British series The Avengers. I thought the music was very fitting with a quite mysterious and foreboding sound. The movie was directed by John Gillerman, who had just come off making The Towering Inferno and the 1976 version of King Kong. So it's no wonder that he was picked to helm a major all-star movie like this, and did a great job. All in all, I think this was an excellent adaptation of Death on the Nile, and a great version of the Poirot character. As I mentioned at the start, there are another 5 films that Peter Ustinov starred in, so I'm looking forward to checking out those as well. This movie is quite long, 2 hours and 20 minutes, but it never felt too long to me. I'm sure there are scenes that could have been tightened up or cut entirely, but then you might lose some of those moments between all of these great actors. I usually don't mind a movie getting a bit longer, so I was very okay with it. So if you're in the mood for a great murder mystery, I highly recommend Death on the Nile. Thanks for checking out this review. If you enjoyed it, please check back to my channel, Hildebrand Productions, and adios for now.